Welcome to the Tune Under podcast. We are the Southern Hemisphere's only dedicated Newcastle United podcast. The season might be finished, but we're not finished. We'll keep going. We're going to keep going through the summer. There's probably going to be more to talk about through the break than there was through the season, the way the transfer window looks like it's going to go. Today we've got a special guest on. So we've got the BBC Newcastle commentator since 2016. Took over from the legendary Mick Lowes. He is the voice of the clips that Newcastle tweet out after the games. So whenever Newcastle show the goals and the match action, it's this guy's voice you hear. And he's also the man who has the great pleasure of sitting next to and working with John Anderson. Welcome to the Tune Under Pod, Mr. Matthew Raisbeck. How you doing?
Hi there. Thanks for having me. It's great to be able to join you finally, and looking forward to having a chat.
No worries. Thanks for coming on. We've also got regulars Craig and Ken's. Are you okay, Craig?
I'm cracking, mate. Thanks, Evan.
And we've got Bobby and Ballarat. Bobby's got COVID, haven't you, Bobby?
I have, yes. A week of isolation, so yeah, it hasn't been too bad, but I've got cabin fever. I want to get out of the house.
You should do what I did and just fire out a load of podcasts when you've got COVID. That seemed to work for me.
I don't have the technical capabilities, mate.
All right. So what we'll do is we'll chat to Matthew about basically how he got into commentating, how he manages to control Ando when he's working with him, and then we'll obviously talk about Newcastle United as well, the changes between pre-takeover and post-takeover, the exciting new world we're all living in now, and we'll wrap up after that. That sound okay, Matthew?
Yeah, spot on. Let's do it.
Excellent. We'll just have a quick break and we'll be back after this. All right, so Matthew, I'm 36. I think you're just a year or two younger than me, maybe. Same generation.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering, really, first of all, what's your kind of earliest memories of Newcastle games? Probably the Bobby era, is it?
Well, I'm 34, so yeah, same sort of era. Would have grown up in watching, supporting, following Newcastle. It's the Kevin Keegan entertainers team from about '94 that I can remember. I think probably the first season that I can remember properly would be '94 and '95. I was aware of, as a small child, as we all will have done, played football before that. And I had the Premier League sticker album from the '93-'94 season, but I didn't really follow or take in and process events that closely. So it'd be '94-'95, which was obviously the team playing in Europe. That was the year that Andy Cole was sold, and finished 6th in the Premier League after making a really strong start and top maybe end of September, start of October. So my introduction to Newcastle was when they had a brilliant team, and in my opinion, the greatest manager or person in my lifetime that we've had in Kevin Keegan running the club. So I think when you go in at that level, that's probably what you become accustomed to, and a lot of things that follow get judged against that. But that would be it. And then the next 2 or 3 years that followed were thrilling but heartbreaking as well. And then there were highs and lows that followed that. And then the Sir Bobby Robson era as well, which when you get a little bit older, you can take it all in and remember it all so clearly. And then since then it's just been very Newcastle, hasn't it? But yeah, those sort of early to mid '90s is the point at which I entered.
There's a whole generation of fans like us, isn't there, who got introduced to Newcastle at that time, and we just thought it was like that all the time. We were like, it's always exciting, we're always going to play attacking football, and then it doesn't really work like that, does it? Craig, you're of the same generation.
I am a year or two older. I remember Keegan coming in. My very first game was Mickey Quinn's debut at St James's Park when he got the 4 against Leeds. Don't remember the game, but apparently I was there. That was my first ever. But yeah, Keegan is the ultimate hero and legend for many on Tyneside, and I long for the day when he makes that appearance back at St James's, which hopefully will be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say, anyone who's a couple of years older will know that the good times weren't always around, and that it was a bit more difficult, in the 80s. And John Anderson, who you've mentioned, will talk in the car or the train on the way to away matches, and here's some of the stories. And from where Newcastle were when Kevin Keegan came back as manager to where he took them in just a couple of years was an incredible transformation, and we've seen a great turnaround this season. But for him to do what he did, not just with the team but with the club, certainly shouldn't be forgotten about, should it? Even though it was 30 years ago, and I think that laid foundations for any future strength and success that the club had. But like I said, I think when you remember that time, you just can't help but go back to it and compare the here and now to that, because it was such a special time to watch Newcastle, and it's probably also my favourite era of following football. And I've wondered why that was, and was it just that the Premier League was quite new and therefore it was interesting? Was it the kits? I mean, I think we had the best kits that we've ever had then. Most of them, those Adidas ones in the mid 90s. But is it really the fact that Newcastle were good and were strong and were challenging? And it's probably that over and above anything else.
Well, hopefully we'll find out in the next few years whether that was mainly what it was, or whether there was something magical about the 90s. How do you go about becoming a football commentator, Matthew? Because I remember playing like Football Manager or playing FIFA, and you do like sometimes little commentaries in your head and stuff. Is that how it worked with you? Is that how you get into it, and then you just keep it going and become a professional commentator?
Well, my first sort of experience of following football through the media was listening to the games on the radio, because I didn't have a season ticket when I was growing up, and I went to some matches with relatives, and then when I could go with my mates, I would do that when I got a bit older. But from an early age, it was listening to the radio, and that was Mick Lowe's on Metro in the Northeast with Mick Martin, and then later the BBC with Nick Barnes, and then with Mick, who moved across, and also Justin Lockwood when he took over from Mick on Metro. So I would switch between the two stations, but it was always really part of my routine on a match day, listening to the radio, and that took me close to the action, which is what the radio can do, and you get the atmosphere, and it can be so exciting, especially when you have a good team, and I think that helps as well. But had it not been for listening to Mick in those days in the mid 90s when I was really getting into football in a big way, then I wouldn't have pursued any sort of career in the media, because that really inspired me to do it. And I thought it would be difficult because it's not the sort of thing that I knew anyone else was doing, and I wasn't sure how to get into the media. I think now probably fans have a bit more knowledge of it, because like with your show and your podcast and other really good fan media that's out there, people can set up on their own, and it's easier to interact with people in the media through things like Twitter. But back then, I think you just had to get into a professional organisation. So when I left school in 2006, I managed to get a 2-month placement at the BBC, a couple of days a week, and then they let me come in for that season to work on the show on a Saturday, which was the commentaries and phone in, and I did a few other bits for them, just basically volunteering. And then from that, I got some work behind the scenes, whether it was answering phones at all hours of the day, operating the studio desk, and then eventually more and more on-air work.
So take us behind the scenes on a commentary day. Do you have a routine at all, or what do you do to prepare?
Yeah, well, on a match day itself, John Anderson and I will normally get there. If it's an away game, we usually travel together. Sometimes we have to go separately if he's doing our nightly football phone in the day before. From location, like in London, he might go a bit earlier and do it there, because I'm often at the press conference, that kind of thing. But usually we'll get there 3 hours before kickoff, which might seem like a lot. And I know fans normally get in 90 minutes before the game starts, but we have to, have our bags checked at the media entrance at most grounds. We have to pick up our media accreditation, get into our seat, plug our kit in, make sure that the line works so that we can broadcast. And once you're in, once you're set up, then you can relax a bit. You can have some food, and then just finish your preparations for the show and for the match, because we broadcast sometimes for an hour before kickoff. So when you get there 3 hours before, you've kind of got 2 hours before your show starts. But once, by the time you're in your seat and you've got set up, you've probably got an hour and a half, and the time goes very, very quickly. Actually, at Burnley, in the final day of the season, our kit wouldn't work at all. So we were lent a new box to broadcast from by TalkSport. So BBC and commercial radio are obviously rivals because they're different media organisations, but the people that you find and that you encounter, the other commentators, they're all fantastic. And you get good relationships with people who work for different organisations. And that was an example of it on Sunday when Ian Danter and Mark Wilson from TalkSport in the UK gave us their spare box, their spare lead, so that we could broadcast. And we would do the same for them, and we have for them and for other radio stations, because our office is almost next door to St James's Park. So those are the challenges you can have on a match day. But in terms of preparation for a game, I will do notes across a couple of days before a match. It's trickier when there's a midweek game. But with Newcastle this year, there haven't been many cup ties, and that's been the case for a long time. So you kind of just have a match at the weekend. I've got my notebook here to show you kind of what I do and how I do it. And let's have a look. So here is Newcastle against Everton. This is a good game that I opened the page on. I hope you can see. There. That's one page. That'll be on Everton mostly. And then here's a page that's mostly on... that's the Everton page there.
That's astonishing.
That's facts about the players and things like that.
Yeah.
Holy moly.
So what you've got here, I know the light's not brilliant. What you've got here are the two teams. Anything that's highlighted, these are the changes from the previous match. So I write the team from the last game up here, then the team for the match that we're watching in here, subs down there, and then I have a section on the opposition, which will be here, and then some information on their players, which I'm not really likely to use. It's more just for my benefit if they come on, or maybe if they score a milestone goal, or they go off injured, or someone's making their debut, that kind of thing. And with Newcastle, sort of where they can go, a bit on the referee and the assistants, a bit on the table where they can move if they win, draw, or what happens if they lose. Some general stats about their record, and maybe some head-to-head stuff, and then some bits on the players. I think there's Matt Target there, and this was his debut, wasn't it? So a little bit on him and his Premier League history, that kind of thing, and a bit on a few of the players. So that's what I do. I do not use all of this in a match, or I use probably most of it in the build-up. Whereas we might, if we're talking about the opposition, say that they've been on a bad run, and then ask Ando, about them, who the danger is in the team, or maybe look at the head-to-head and, well, they've got a bad record against this team, haven't they? That kind of thing. And then try and do the same for all the games. There's West Ham away, so you can see very similar. I switch it around whenever Newcastle are at home. They go on this side. When they're away, put them on this side. So I've drawn a league table there as well for West Ham, because that was a Saturday lunchtime game, so nothing else was going to change while Newcastle were playing.
Look how neat your handwriting is. I can't even read my own handwriting.
Well, I want to direct you to Nick Barnes, our Sunderland commentator at BBC Newcastle. you might have seen his notebooks, which are works of art. They're actually older versions of them have been like reprinted and put in football museums, and he's featured in magazines around the world. So what I do here, full credit to Nick, because it's inspired by his approach, which is a colourful one. But Nick will draw the club crest for the opposition and draw a Subbuteo style figure with the kit on. His is very artistic. The layout and actually the type of book that I use is the same as Nick's, but his is very artistic. Mine, I just do a lot of writing, and I try and do it in the colours of as you saw there, the colours of the opposition, and that just helps me differentiate between stats or things like that, and just different players. So there again, one has Crystal Palace, so you can see sort of red and blue, and obviously everything's in black. This was the first game after Steve Bruce left. Graham Jones was in charge, wasn't it, at Palace in October. So that's what I do, and it takes a bit of time, but it's kind of, you need to have the information, and you need to know what it means, even if you don't use it all.
I was going to ask what you do in between matches but you've just answered that with those.
No, I get that a lot. I get that a lot, even from people at work as well. Because obviously what we do when we're commentating is we're traveling and we're not in the office, and we are a radio station, and we broadcast all of our shows apart from Through the Night from the building that we're in. But the job of a football commentator is very, very different. And firstly, we're really lucky to have these roles, and I am the one that I've got, where you focus on the club and you do the games and do the other stuff, because that allows you just to put everything into that one team. Whereas at some other radio stations or at national radio, certainly at that top level, the commentators will do different teams and different games. But I love the fact that I can cover Newcastle United, because obviously it's the club that I follow. But to focus solely on that is great. But you'll be travelling. Sometimes you'll be travelling away for a day or two, or sometimes longer. Like when we had Southampton and Chelsea away in the space of a few days, that ended up being a longer trip. You have all of that, and then you're out often doing press conferences, interviews. And the majority of the broadcasting you do comes from outside, because you're always at a football game. So the hours are quite irregular. You can be getting home in the middle of the night sometimes, but that is no hardship, and that's no problem for me, because it's still hugely exciting. And we're lucky that we get to do it professionally, because a lot of fans make huge sacrifices to go and do that themselves to follow the team.
Yeah, Serena Taylor was telling us about a highly stressful experience where a car broke down when she was on the way to Southampton and stuff like that. So she gave us a little bit of an insight into the stress when you're on a time pressure as well. But as a fan, then, you've just touched on there, you're a fan. How do you kind of keep your emotions in check, and how do you kind of calm yourself down or not get too excited?
Well, you'll all know that it's really difficult when you're watching, because you are invested in it. There's no doubt about it. But I think being in the position that I'm in to watch the game, there's a few things. Firstly, probably when you're in the sort of football media, it does dilute your passion a little bit, because you are not there as a supporter, you are there professionally. So you have to have a slightly different mindset, even though you might prefer a certain outcome or a certain narrative. You have to focus on doing the job, and that's why you're there. And I take that responsibility quite seriously, because you are there to bring across what's happening to the people who can't be there. And I've been in that position as a listener before, relying on the radio and the commentary to tell me what's happening, why it's happening, is it any good? And that's your job. So that's how I go into it. I go into it with that approach and that mindset of, well, I'm here to commentate. I'm here to tell people what's happening. Obviously, we want to try and do it in an entertaining way if the match allows. but I make sure I sort of stick to the principles of what I have to do. And like I say, you are obviously invested in it, or you get engrossed in the game. And I think with the Arsenal match at home at the end of the season, in the second half, when the goals went in and the chances were coming, when Wilson narrowly missed, and then when Bruno scored, and obviously we got really excited. That is you getting fully involved in it. And sometimes I think I've probably been a bit too excited, but there might have been other times when I haven't given it enough welly. So it is about finding that balance between the passion and the enthusiasm, and being professional as well. Everyone in the media will have their own views on it. Every commentator will have their own style. Every fan and listener will have their own preference. There'll be plenty who don't like the way I do it. There'll be others who are quite happy with what we broadcast when we're at the game. So it is a subjective thing, I think. But yeah, sometimes it is difficult, and I would say that it's harder for us when things aren't going well. Since maybe February time, when the results have been good, it's been great, because you actually look forward to the games knowing that the team, well, they can play well here, they might win. And that's better for us if they win, because there's more to be excited about. I think it makes for a better programme. It's a better match for the listeners and for the supporters than the early days of this season, or even, the other times under Steve Bruce. I mean, never mind lockdown situations and behind closed doors, but when the team's not doing well, it's frustrating. People don't enjoy watching it. They don't enjoy listening. It's not as, the quality of the football wasn't as good. So when things are going well, that's better for us as commentators and as broadcasters.
I'm pleased you mentioned that Arsenal game, because we've got a little clip here.
All right.
And he's gone for it from That is so close to what would have been an unbelievable goal.
To us, that sounds like someone getting excited, and we love that. We love that. That's what I can tell you, that's what listeners, especially for us who are so far away, that conveying that sense of excitement. And let's be fair, that would have been goal of the century, never mind goal of the season.
A couple of things. The man sitting to my left, John Anderson, was out of his seat, and he was doing probably most of the screaming there. And listen, if Ando's out of his seat, then it's good. And he was out of his seat when Bruno scored the winner against Leicester as well, which was wow. I mean, what a moment. But our position at the ground at St James's is we're at the back of the media section, which is 5 rows from the front. So you've got the bench at the bottom of that area, the Newcastle bench. So we're slightly to the right of the halfway line, but we're probably as close as you'd want to be. Any lower down, and you wouldn't have such a good view of the pitch. So we were possibly not quite in line with Wilson when he hit it, but we had a great view, and I think that added to the way we described it. I think if we'd been higher up, when you're sitting higher up, you've got a better tactical overview, but you're a bit more removed from the game. So I think that brings us closer to the action, and that helps us bring the audience closer to it. Also, the crowd noise, and in behind closed doors games, I mean, it was awful, because you felt stupid. You were shouting in an empty football ground. And yes, there were a few of the broadcasters there, but people near you could hear your every word and would look at you when you got excited. And it's just natural, isn't it? If someone near you was shouting, you probably wonder what they're doing. And it was really weird. But the worst thing was the absence of fans. But from a radio point of view, which is all about how things sound, not having the crowd noise there was awful. And what we would have is we would have the mics on at the game, or for a while we couldn't do away matches, so we would get a feed of the pitch side microphone just to get some of the sounds of the game. We would play in what was like a blanket crowd noise, which had been recorded somewhere, and it was just all the same. Just there wasn't any chanting, there were no whistles. It was just something to lift it. But there's nothing like having the reaction of a crowd. especially at St James's Park, where it is loud. And that Arsenal game is the loudest I've ever heard it as a fan or in work capacity. It was deafening at times, unbelievable. And it's been good this season, very good. It's never been that good,
Wow.
as far as I'm concerned. And what you hear with the crowd there, something like that, the reaction of the crowd, as much as what we're saying, will tell you what's happening. So you can hear the intake of breath collectively and the excitement.
Silence.
When it just drops wide, or when the goal goes in, the roar. And we've got a set of steps next to us, and then we've got fans, so we're close to supporters, which I think hopefully helps with bringing the noise across. But even when you didn't have lockdown, so we didn't have fans during the lockdowns and the behind closed doors period, from the fans how things are going, because you'll hear a groan, or you'll hear it suddenly if someone spins and gets away, you'll hear oh, and then something's on, something's happening. So that accompanies what we do brilliantly, and that was missing. And even if it's having a go at the referee or booing or something, that is all part of the experience and the spectacle of sport, isn't it? So St James's Park's been electric recently, but having fans back for us, commentary point of view, is massive as well, because it just didn't sound right without them.
We talked about war flags for about 20 minutes on our last podcast of the Arsenal game and just said how amazing that was. So it's obvious to everybody how brilliant that is. But you talked about Ando there a moment ago when he was. I think another time he might have been out of his seat was when Jacob Murphy went through against Watford away.
Oh God,
Everyone knows what happened there. That bit of commentary went absolutely viral. What's it like to work with Ando? I've met him quite a few times because I used to work in pubs around the Tyne Valley where I used to like going.
Yeah.
So what's it like to work with him though? He's obviously great fun, isn't he?
Yeah, very much so. Does anyone want to try and recreate just put it in the net?
I can't shout because my daughter's in bed just next door to me. Craig, you do it.
The accent will do. He'll be telling, just put it in the net.
The thing about that was,
I apologise.
That's pretty good. But he gets it a lot now, and I'm not that prolific on Twitter, so I'm quite slow sometimes at responding. I try to limit my time on there, but I get tweets now and again, a meme with Ando on of that. People send me the clip just randomly. You remember this, or I was watching this earlier and started laughing. People mention it when they come up to us when we're travelling to away matches. That game, Newcastle had actually played quite well. It's probably the one. Well, I mean, they were okay, relatively speaking, at times. Maybe in September, October, and they should have won. I mean, they battered Watford, who were not great and had been relegated, 20 odd shots. So it was right at the end of the game, and they hadn't won, and it was disappointing. But the two of us, we just had COVID for the previous 2 weeks, so we'd missed the Leeds game the week before. I think we picked up COVID at Manchester United. So we'd missed the game, and obviously we'd been isolating, and that was our first day out, really first day back. So I think we were probably on adrenaline, maybe a bit high, just being out of the house. But Ando was good through that game. He was really really into it, because sometimes the football's not good, and it is harder when it's not good. But there was plenty happening, and then Murphy ran through, and it happened, and I just expected him to score. It was a quick break. It was quite exciting, and then I can just remember. I think a fist hit the desk, and then just this eruption to my right where he was, and he said it. And there were a few people. There was a lot of radio on the row where we were, but there was newspaper behind, and fans were in front, Watford fans, but they were probably too far down to sort of turn around and have a look. So it's quite a drop to where they were. I just had a look, and people were leaning over just to see who it was and what was going on. But then he carried on after that, and And I don't think it makes obviously just the clip of the moment, but there was a bit more of it after that, and he was really, really angry. But I think he kind of said the same thing again with almost the same level of rage. So people were looking and wondering, and then at the end of the match, which followed quite soon, we were summing up, and there was a bit more frustration that came out, and then there was a phone in, the presenter in the studio. And by which point the media area had cleared a little bit. The manager interviews, apart from the TV, was still on Zoom. So there were some journalists there, but he was really, really angry during the phone in. And I remember just seeing people turn and look at him, and they were enjoying it as well, because it was such raw passion and frustration that every supporter felt. And he's nothing against Jacob Murphy. Because Ando had been complimentary about him over the last 2 years, because he came back and did well the first season, and again last season had some good moments, missed a few one-on-ones, but
hit the post a few times.
Yeah, well, he quite likes him, and Murphy's a really nice lad, a good professional, and he is a good player. But it was just something that he didn't let go of. He kept on at it after the game. I should say as well that we'd mentioned that we'd missed the previous match through COVID. I'm not sure we're going to spend much time talking about Steve Bruce here, but he actually came to find us after the game to see how we were, and just see that we were all right. And my experience personally, one-on-one with Steve Bruce, was that was in keeping with how he was. I know some members of the media had their issues with him, and I know most supporters had their issues with him, but there was another side that I saw. He was very helpful, very good to me, and just coming over to check on and see how we were and have a chat, because he'd seen what coronavirus could do at the club to players and staff. It was nice and was appreciated. But that game was all about Ando and just put it in the net. Yeah.
I really. So go on, Bobby.
Sorry, I'll tell you how viral it went, Matthew. My friend who barracks with Middlesbrough in Melbourne sent me the clip via an email on it. It had gone to a Borough supporter in Melbourne. That's how viral it got to. So it was crazy.
I'll tell him. We know that after a few days, maybe a week, the clip that a fan put out on Twitter had about 350,000 views. I think did it get onto TikTok as well?
Ando will have been pleased about that. What the hell, TikTok? I'm
not sure he fully, because he doesn't do social media, appreciates the impact online. But it was a moment that it was purely natural as well. Just a raw reaction, and like I say, the way that a lot of fans would have responded.
How, and you were talking about Steve Bruce there, and that's something we have heard before about his relationship with the media and how he was quite good with some media, but he obviously did have his issues with the Chronicle in particular as well, and a few others, definitely, especially towards the end. But how do you manage the balance between maintaining good relationships with Newcastle players, managers, employees, and also being critical or offering kind of opinions on air? And do you ever get pulled up for it by anybody?
Well, my job primarily is to commentate on the action, but there are duties around that, which are interviewing the manager before the game, after the game, speaking to players as well. So I'm in a slightly different position to all the Northeast football writers that are there chasing stories or writing opinion pieces, match reports, doing player ratings even. So the role, even though we're covering the club, we're doing it in a completely different way, and there's no other radio that does it. So it is unique in that sense. So my job is slightly different, and I don't want to talk for the newspapers, but from my perspective, I'm there to describe what's happening, tell people what's going on, where the ball is on the pitch, which team's got it. Ando's there to tell you if it's any good or not, why it's happened. Sometimes we encroach into each other's territory. He might say what's happening. I might give an opinion. I mean, even if I say good ball, I'm putting a judgment on something. But, that is just part of football commentary. But really, I'm there to effectively be factual, but also try and do it in a way that makes it good to listen to and brings across the sense of occasion and what it means. With the interviews, in recent months, after restrictions were eased, we now do all the pre-match interviews in one room. So they're on Newcastle's website and all the media's in there together. But previously, up to coronavirus, because of our broadcast deal and relationship with the club, we would get the managers separately, away from TV and newspapers. Hopefully that will return, because that's good for us, but it's also good for other people, because they might get their own opportunities as well. But it meant that you could build up a relationship with the manager, whether it was Steve Bruce or Rafa Benitez, or in the years gone by, Mick Lowe's had good relationships with, I think, all the managers. So that helps you gain a bit of an understanding and I think trust between you. Steve Bruce was very, very good, very, very helpful. I didn't know him before he came to Newcastle. Some of the media did from Sunderland, but he was good to talk to, and I always found that before and after you recorded, he was very, very good. When you started recording, I think I always felt that there was a sense that he knew what people thought of him and the way that the club was, and he was trying to be careful, but he invariably ended up saying the wrong thing. Probably this is how when I analysed it, he was desperately trying not to say the wrong thing, but just ended up going into areas that he didn't with wording and language. Before and after, he was really, really good, really funny, some great stories from football. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to like him as a fan or you think he's suitable to manage the club. But there was a different side that I saw. Now, I don't know him that well, that I think people probably would have warmed to a bit more had they seen that on camera. But ultimately, it's about the results and the performances. And as Rafa Benitez showed, even at a Newcastle owned by Mike Ashley, you can get the support of the fans and you can do a job that people are happy with. And Rafa was unbelievable. He used to spend more time talking about other things than football, but he was so generous with his time. There was one time before an interview, because something Mick started with Rafa was to say a phrase in Spanish before the interview pre-match, and he told me carry that on, and Rafa liked that. So I'd have a phrase in Spanish or a question in Spanish. I can't speak that much. I've done a few courses over the years, but I have a colleague who's from Madrid, so she would help me with a phrase, and even though she's Spanish, Rafa would tell you it was wrong and give you 5 minutes to say it, but he did it in a nice way. I think he just likes to help people and likes to help people learn. But we'd sit in the groundsman's office at the training ground, and then sometimes he'd grab the groundsman's notepad and take my pen and then effectively give me a Spanish lesson for 10 minutes about verbs or certain words, letters, sounds. And you're sitting there with a man, and the club press officer would always be there, who'd won the Champions League. There's 3 of you in a room, and he's talking to you about Spanish language. One time he drew a map of Spain because I asked him a question about the Spanish election. So he got some paper, drew a full map of Spain, was setting out all the different regions, and this 15 minutes, and then we did 10 minutes on tape about the match. And Rafa was like that, and it was surreal, but he was fantastic. And then you get then a decent relationship with them, I think, and trust, because you get to know them and they understand where you're coming from, and you get to understand better what they're trying to do, where they're coming from. So I think that helps. Not had that opportunity yet with Eddie Howe, but we do seem to have a decent relationship as much as we can. There's certainly not been a problem, and I really like him. So that relationship with the manager, from my point of view is really important. But in terms of criticism and things like that, I've just got to be factual and honest, and you've got to tell the truth to the people who are listening when in the commentary. So if it's not very good, we can't say that it is good. If it's, you've just got to reflect what's happening. And after the games, it's harder when they've lost and when things aren't going well. But you've still got to try and put across the questions that you feel fans would want answered. And that's really how you have to do it. You've just got to be honest with it. Brilliant.
All right, we will have a very quick break and we'll be back to get more into specifically Newcastle United and how things have been of late. We'll see you in a minute. Welcome back to the Tune Under podcast. We've got Matthew Raisbeck of BBC Radio Newcastle here with us. Bobby, you can take the next question to Matthew. This is one that we often get a good response to.
Well, tell us something that has made you laugh over your time covering Newcastle.
Yeah, I think we've probably covered it, because I was going to talk about the just put it in the net moment, which and I'm going to go back to that because it happened, and I was like, oh wow, that's strong. But then, like I say, it carried on, and I was trying not to laugh. I actually had to put my microphone off on our kick because I was starting to laugh, but inaudibly, as in not making a sound. But I didn't want it to come across, so my shoulders were going. But the game was carrying on, and Watford almost scored, went down the other end, and nearly won 2-1. So that was a big one, definitely. With the laughter, I mean, you do have. There's probably a lot of things that I can't repeat. You travel with the other media, and you have conversations and you hear things, and some of the stories that you get from John Anderson or even from Rafa Benitez or Steve Bruce that I've heard that are not repeatable. I just think we're so lucky with the access that we have, and to be in such a privileged position. Very, very fortunate, and to be around people at the top of football, and especially people who run Newcastle. Just very, very lucky. But I can't think of anything for greater impact than just put it in the net moment. There might be something that'll come to me when I'm lying in bed tonight, trying to get to sleep. But that's the number one. I don't think that
I was really interested what you said before about how that day Ando was just on it. He was in a good mood. And so can you sometimes tell? Do you feed off and you're like, all right, we're in for business here because Ando's on one. He's in a good mood. And then is it vice versa? Does it work with the other way around as well? So you kind of feed off each other, sort of thing. Is that how it works?
There have been times that we've looked at each other after 10 minutes and gone like that, because it's going to be a long night or a long afternoon, and sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes the game can just explode into life and it's brilliant, but you know as fans, you get a sense of how something's going, and if it's not going to be good, it's not going to be good, and it's going to be a hard watch and a hard listen. But I think sometimes when there's plenty happening, there's a good atmosphere, and at Watford it's not bad, and you've got a good view, so you're quite close to the action. It was just one of those games, and like I say, we'd both just come back from having COVID, so I think we were like really, really happy to be out the house and there. And I mean, Ando's always switched on for the game, but it is hard when it's not a good match and there's nothing happening. To really to hold your enthusiasm for the full game, but that one, in terms of the early season, it wasn't too bad. So I just sensed that he was really fired up that day, maybe more so than he's usually fired up. But like you've seen with Bruno against Leicester, with Arsenal, when there's things happening, when the game's good. And even the defeats, Manchester City away, Liverpool at home, when when there's a good team out there, or it's a game with a lot of action, then I think that's when you get a better commentary. Actually,
there's one game for me that springs to mind with you saying 10 minutes in, you're puffing your cheeks, it's be a long game. And that would be probably a few years ago now, the 2-2 draw with Everton at Goodison Park, when for 92 minutes we were probably a dog's dinner of a performance. It was an absolute abominable game. And then the game is flipped on its head. There's two parts of the commentary that I remember from that. One is Ando calling Pickford a dodgy keeper, which, but we've got a great relationship as a fan base with Pickford. And then just the reactions those two goals went in. I was watching it was just before about getting ready to go for work that morning, and I was going to turn this off now. This is just too embarrassing to watch. And then that first goal went in. It was like, we could get a second here. Then we did. And the players ran back to the halfway line, not knowing who scored, who put it in the net or anything. And to me, that is just a perfect example of what you mentioned just before. Do you remember much of that game?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, it was awful, wasn't it? And it was awful by Steve Bruce's own admission after the game. And I think everyone was shell-shocked by what had happened. And I remember being in the tunnel area afterwards doing the interviews, and like Newcastle, people couldn't believe what had happened. Everton, they had almost a haunted look on their face because you're 2-0 up on 93-4 minutes and you don't win. I mean, that shouldn't happen. But it was the most improbable comeback, wasn't it? And once they got one, and this is the thing, the first goal, I mean, it was an overhead kick, wasn't it? Or was something like acrobatic. Lejeune is centre half, and it never gets spoken about. What a good goal it was. If they'd won 1-0 with that goal, it would be celebrated as one of the best that Newcastle have scored in modern times. Great finish, and you knew it was Lejeune. And then they got the free kick on halfway, and I'm certain that Ando said they'll get another one here, or something like that. Because we'd been sort of grumbling about the fact that it was 4 or 5 minutes added on, and we just wanted the final whistle. And I remember the ball going into the box, and then there was just chaos. Everton dropped, and there was panic, and the panic spread around Goodison Park. And I don't know, you just felt that something was going to happen. You just get that sort of from the Everton fans around us. I think they were scared. Maybe they'd seen it before that season. I can't quite remember if they'd been in that position prior to the Newcastle game. But it was like pinball, wasn't it? And there were a couple of saves and a block. I think Kraft had a chance where he probably should have scored, and then it came back, and then we didn't know that Lejeune had the final shot. And I remember, I think the goalkeeper Pickford must have had it in his hands eventually, or I'm not sure. But then referee pointed and blew the whistle, and he just couldn't believe it. It was just ridiculous. I mean, laughable, really. But at Goodison Park, it's not a great commentary position because the roof of the stand you're in is held up by pillars. So one of them was in the way of that penalty box. Now, just moving slightly to the side, I could see the action, but it's not great, and you've got no leg room at all, so you're really squashed in. And there's also not many replay screens either. There's only 2, I think, maybe 3, but I couldn't see a replay because everyone else stood up and was blocking the screen. So Ando had stood up as well to try, and we were on the back row of the media area. With noisy Everton fans right behind us, to try and have a look. So I had no idea. He was trying to work out what was going on. And I think the way we described it reflected the chaos of the moment. And I know it's a clip from NUFC TV that's done the rounds quite a lot. If I could do it again, I'd probably, I don't know, maybe be a bit more concise, because I think it went on a long time, but I genuinely had no idea who scored. I think Ando was out of the game for a minute trying to work out what had happened. We just didn't know. I don't even think we knew that it was Lejeune when we finished the programme. It was just sheer madness. but a terrible game, an awful performance, and they got a point out of it. It was ridiculous. It really was. And how many times has that happened to Newcastle?
Too many.
I was going to say, don't worry, it's not like you're broadcasting to thousands of people, so you need to be able to tell them what's happening.
I mean, obviously, I just remember, telling them that, I mean, the goal had gone in, we didn't know who scored. I think it said something like the game had gone, it had gone, and they've somehow come back, that kind of thing. But it was just, I mean, we were just in disbelief, and I think, a lot of it's a blur. I've listened back to it a couple of times, not for a while, and it was really, really strange. Like I said, just chaotic, wasn't it?
I don't think it mattered who scored. I was just running around the lounge room because I knew he'd scored. I didn't care who it was. So I think your commentary matched what I was doing. I think I was leaping at the
Well, the other thing though with that, you were saying, Craig, weren't you, about wanting to switch off? I think a lot of people would have switched off in the same way that if there were Everton fans had gone 2-0 up, they'd gone home, they'd gone to the the pubs nearby or the fish and chip shop across the road from the stand, and then they didn't win, and there would have been Newcastle fans that have thought, this is rubbish, had enough, and switched off, probably stopped watching, and who could blame them? And then you miss that. It's like, there's a friend of mine, a colleague at work, who's got a season ticket, and he left it 4-0 down against Arsenal. I think he was on the front of the Chronicle or the back of it, and you do that sometimes, don't you? And normally it's the right decision because there's no comeback, but there, you mean. Yeah,
I've got to admit, I texted my friend at half time of that Arsenal game when I had a season ticket, and I said, should we just go to the pub? And he said, no, let's wait for the next goal. And I'm so grateful he said that, because that was a very lucky escape. But you were talking before about the press conferences, and when we had Chris Waff on, he was telling us quite a good story about how the press conferences at the moment are in this barn kind of thing in the training ground area. So I was wondering if you could tell us something that kind of Newcastle fans might not know about or might not necessarily ask about, but they would find interesting about working with Newcastle. It could be to do with individuals or behind the scenes, or have you got something for us there?
Yeah, well, I'll recap maybe a bit on how it works pre-match, and I'll tell you how it works post-match, because I've talked about our routine and how we get there 3 hours before, we check our kit, plug it in, connect to the studio, and we have a headset each, and then we have a third microphone for crowd noise and sound effects, and that's how we do it. But pre-match and post-match are about the interviews. So pre-match is Chris, who's a good friend of mine, and one of the very best Newcastle writers out there, and there's some fantastic people covering the club in the written media. Very, very good people at the top of their game. We all do it at the training ground, and there is the indoor training facility, which has I think a 4G pitch, and just built onto the back of that is a small block which has the ground staff office in, and that groundsman's room is Mick, the groundsman at the club, his office, where we used to do the radio interview pre-match with the manager. But since March, since we were back in person post-Zoom era, it's all been in one room, which I think was probably a waiting room for parents, for academy kids historically. I mean, remember the site that they're on was an old sports club, like a squash club. I used to play football there in the holidays from school when I was growing up in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that's when the club acquired it. And obviously it's been modified over 20 years, but not that much in recent times. I mean, Rafa Benitez oversaw some smaller improvements. There's plans to make bigger changes now, as I'm sure you've read, that will hopefully happen before they can move to a new place. So it's not purpose-built for the media. And the room we're in, I mean, there is a small stage, and there's a table for the manager and sponsors, branding boards behind. So you're in there. It's just a small block with a couple of offices and changing rooms, and then a door to the indoor training pitch. So you're in there, and now we've got TV cameras at the back. Keith Downey from Sky Sports, someone from Premier League Productions, usually Andy Sixsmith, is there, and then me, and then Look North, BBC Look North, the regional TV here, and ITV Time Tees. They'll have someone there as well. So we're on the front row, and the newspapers sit behind, and we all record the full thing. The club put it out on the website, whereas previously it was radio was a separate section, TV was a separate section, and there'd be another one for the newspapers separately. So that's not happening at the moment. I don't know if that's going to return and change, but everything that you see on the club website is what goes out there. There's nothing that's held back really. Post-match at St James's Park, there are 4 or 5 TV interview rooms inside in the media suite. So in the Millburn stand, just to the right of the players' entrance, of the old Millburn reception, this is where the away team will go in, because Newcastle's players go in through the corner between the Leazes and the Millburn stand. So to the right, towards the Gallagher end, there's a big media room with a stage, some seats, desks, tables, and an area where food is served. At the back of that, there are TV interview rooms. So manager will come down from the other end of the corridor, from where the changing rooms are, past the tunnel into the media room, and we'll do probably Sky Sports match of the day, maybe another one. Sometimes they'll do a 4th, sometimes even more, overseas TV interview. So by the time they come to talk to radio, they've already done the same interview 3 or 4 times.
It can't be bothered.
Which is it sounds strange, doesn't it, if you don't know how it works? But then there's so many different rights holders in football, locally, nationally, internationally, that part of what they pay for is the access. And some of these interviews might just be 2 or 3 minutes, but they're doing the same thing over and over again. And they also will do the club website a bit further back, in a room near the changing rooms. So then they'll come to the radio room that we have separately, and there'll be national radio, and I'll be in there as well. And then we'll go onto the stage in the main section of the media suite to do the written media, to do the newspapers. So that's a lot of talking after a game, and especially after a defeat. And then for players, some of them contractually will have to come down to those interview rooms to do a TV piece, usually Sky match of the day. Sometimes players, if there's a crew there from Brazil, they might want Bruno or Joe Linton, or someone else, overseas rights holders. So the players are doing a lot of talking as well. And then we now go outside, just to the side of the pitch, and that's the mixed zone area, as it's called. You've just got all the media there if they want, and then they can ask players, usually with the help of the press officer, to stop and have a quick chat. And Newcastle players are really good at it. Most of them will stop when you ask them regularly. Sometimes after defeat, a few players politely decline, which you can understand. But after Manchester City, Kieran Trippier, for example, stopped and spoke well, and that was good. Jamal Lascelles talked after Liverpool, after that defeat. It is difficult, and it's easy when they lose. It's easier when they win to get players to talk. But that's kind of how the interview situations of players and managers work pre and post match.
You can understand, can't you, why some managers they get annoyed. Eddie Howe seems like a particularly polite man, but when you see Mourinho and people like that, Guardiola and Klopp do it all the time. They get frustrated, don't they? They lose the rag a little bit, and that gives a good insight into the fact that they've probably had this same conversation 5 times before this. So you get a little bit more understanding, I think, there of what they actually have to do.
Definitely, and by the time these sometimes they might actually speak to radio first if the television room that they need to go in is occupied. They don't hang around. They'll do the interview and they'll stay with you for the interview, but then they'll quickly move on to the next one. I mean, from our point of view, after a match, usually I will let national radio go first, because they can ask him about the game. They can ask him about what it's done to the league table. They've been asking for months now about the summer and the transfer window and players playing for their future. Will there be big changes, that kind of thing? All of that's perfectly legitimate. Then I can ask him stuff that might be more relevant to local radio, such as, well, this player went off injured. How is he? I'm trying to think, after Norwich, Matt Ritchie came on first time since January. Well, you must be pleased to get him back. He's been a big player for the club. So get an answer about Matt Ritchie that maybe for a national audience isn't that interesting, but for us locally, it's a clip, a talking point on our Total Sports show through the week. And it's the sort of thing that the papers would ask as well. So you're coming in from a slightly different point in terms of what you'll ask as well. And if they win, you can probably ask more of these questions. Or also, because you follow the club every week, there might be things. I'm thinking again, that Norwich game, I asked him about Joe Linton. Well, you put him up front, then you move him out to the left. So what was the thinking there? Whereas sometimes people who don't see the team regularly, don't have the knowledge that you have, that fans have, won't understand what these issues are and why they're important and why you want to discuss them. So that's something that we have to think about after the game as well. Because if you go second or third, the main things, what do you think of the performance? What about this goal? Should that have been a penalty? Are you going to finish in the top half? That kind of thing. That's all gone, so you have to find other stuff to ask about.
Just take us back to the day of the takeover then, Matthew. Where were you when you heard about this? Did you have any kind of insight before that it was going to happen? And how do you kind of make sense of what's happened since the takeover?
Because the BBC is such a vast organisation, and in terms of news and sports news, a lot of the takeover background stuff had been done by our colleagues in BBC Sport at sort of national level. But obviously we focused on this a lot because it's a top issue for Newcastle fans who listen to our station and to our football shows. So it was good in that sense, because it meant that we could do something slightly different, and people from BBC News went and did an interview with Amanda Staveley that night that we could use, and I was freed up to be at St James's Park. Now, ideally, I'd be in both places, and I wish I had been, but to be at St James's Park when the news broke was something that I won't forget, because of the reaction from the fans who were there. And I'd heard the day before that it was coming, and it was real. It was on. I think there was a chance it could have been the Wednesday. I'm not sure how big a chance, but then it was the Thursday. So we had time to plan and prepare what we were going to do over the next few days, and it was decided that I would take our satellite vehicle and broadcast from across the road. But because it was such a big story, other parts of the BBC wanted to speak. So I'd been on Radio 5 Live, and actually when the takeover was announced, I was on Radio 4 on the I think it was the PM program, just talking around the issues. And I just remember about 500 to 1,000 fans near the Sir Bobby Robson statue on the corner just erupting. And I'm sure beer was thrown in the air. There were black and white flags and everything, and it just went mad for a few minutes. Couldn't get any phone signal. Then I managed to get a phone signal, and I switched back to BBC Newcastle, and then they came to me live, and I was able to read the statement and confirm that it had happened. And yeah, it's one of those things that I'm sure you three will remember where you were when you heard what you were doing, and I remember it vividly how it played out. And I stayed around the ground that night. I took a lot of videos, and I think we spoke to some fans, and I just broadcast from there. And then I was back there the next morning. We did our breakfast show from the car park at St James's, and then went down to speak to fans who were queuing for season tickets that morning because the takeover had convinced them to come back. And a point that I made a lot, because it is controversial for many people, the Saudi Arabian involvement because of the human rights issues associated with Saudi Arabia. The whole takeover saga is complicated. The situation with the Premier League, the legal cases launched by Mike Ashley, the length of time it took, and many other strands and aspects to it. But the point that I made consistently, and I still believe this to be true, is that any takeover was more about Mike Ashley leaving than who came in.
Definitely.
15 years, supporters have been campaigning and calling for Ashley to go, to sell the club. They had no control over who owned it when he got involved in 2007. They had no real say in who acquired the club last year. If the fans had any control over that, Mike Ashley wouldn't have had 14 and a half years at Newcastle. So it was about him leaving first and foremost, and that was why I think there was such euphoria. That the people who were coming in and who are now in charge and running the club have access to a lot of money is a bonus. But there is also that other side of it as well, and we've heard from fans who were not comfortable with it and still aren't. But for me, it was always first and foremost about Ashley leaving, and that's where we've got our club back line came from. Crystal Palace fans used that against Newcastle in a game that followed a few weeks later. But I think there's probably on the outside maybe a lack of understanding of the issues and why the fans felt the way that they did. And there's been a lot of criticism of Newcastle fans in the media nationally, and I don't think it's difficult to understand why the supporters viewed Mike Ashley and the running of the club the way they did, and therefore why it was so significant that some change arrived and happened, and why it was wanted so much.
I'm pleased we've got local media who are pushing that, because that's how we feel, that's how a lot of Newcastle fans feel, and that, like you said, that's been misrepresented a little bit. And I get it. We get it. We've talked about the Saudi Arabian involvement. We know that there's going to be criticism. And as you become richer and as you become more successful, hopefully, then there's going to be more. You're more of a target as well. But I'm really pleased and encouraged to hear you say that. That's how you are approaching that from a local media point of view, because that's very important, I think, to represent that feeling. And it definitely was about getting rid of Mike Ashley just as much as it was about anyone taking over.
Yeah, well, how often did the discussion over the years go to, the club needs new owners, Mike Ashley needs to sell, and every time something went wrong, everything came back to the way the club was being run, and that's from supporters who know their club, who understand it, know what it needs, know what needs to change, and I think it will be the same at other clubs as well. It's frustrating for fans, isn't it, when fans of other teams tell them that they're wrong, tell them that they're unrealistic, use the line about expectations. Well, only Newcastle fans can fully understand what it's like and know the issues in such detail. You wouldn't have Newcastle fans claiming to be experts on Southampton, who recently had a takeover, haven't they, or any other team, or the Chelsea situation, because it's about that club and that set of supporters. So I know that the criticism that came from outside really rankled with fans and caused a lot of aggravation. But like I say, just a point that I made, and I made it especially when I was on other platforms across the BBC, was that the fans have wanted Mike Ashley out for a long time, and that's what they've got. That's why they're celebrating. Yes, there's controversy and there are issues, and some are uncomfortable with the new owners and the present situation. But the moment that the fans are celebrating is the end of the Mike Ashley era. And I just hope that was a point that wasn't lost on people, because that was significant for the supporters. And it could have been anyone coming in, anyone else probably, and we would have had scenes reminiscent of we saw at St James's in October.
Absolutely.
And in terms of the new owners, what's your assessment of how they've done so far? That's a big question, but in a short answer, how do you kind of feel they've done up to now? It's about 8 months now or so.
And have you met them at all? Like, have you had any one-on-one or times with them?
We've not had any one-on-one recorded interviews, but yes, I mean, met briefly and said hello to, very, very briefly when they walked past us. The chairman will acknowledge and will say hello. I mean, I'm not sure he knows who we are, but he's polite enough to say hello. Same with Jamie Rubin. So we've met Amanda Staveley and Murdoch Gadusi. They often come up, Murdoch in particular, just with all the media, and we'll say hello. We would obviously like the opportunity to interview them properly. We've asked, and then we'll see what happens when more appointments are made. Chief Executive, Sporting Director, whenever that actually does happen, that one. And hopefully we'll get the chance to talk to the hierarchy then. I mean, we didn't speak to Mike Ashley in 14, 15 years. Mick didn't get the chance, Mick Lowe's. We did a couple of interviews with Lee Charnley, who I always found to be very, very good, actually. But probably someone whose association with Mike Ashley will always count against him. But in my experience, he was probably someone that I think suffered from not really being visible and not communicating as much as perhaps he could have done. I don't know if he was particularly comfortable with that side of things, but also he was the man in the position to effectively run the club for Mike Ashley, which is very, very difficult, but that means that you are going to attract a lot of criticism, and there was certainly a lot of things that were wrong. If he'd had more power and more control, I think some things would have been very, very different, but that's maybe for another time. The new owners, I think they've changed the club, and they've returned it in some ways to what it was. And St James's Park, certainly visually, with the removal of the Sports Direct signage, it looks how people wanted to see it, and that makes a big difference, because that things like that, I don't think you can put a price on that. Just returning St James's Park to what it used to be, especially with everything associated with Mike Ashley and Sports Direct. The atmosphere on the match day is better. There's hope. There's optimism. It feels big again. The club and a match day, a home game, feels there's a sense of occasion. Previously, you couldn't get people to go. They had to give away 10,000 half-season tickets. Now, you can't get a ticket. You can't get in. So all these things have come about because of the takeover, but also because of the football and Eddie Howe and the players and what they've done. But they've put money in, the owners. I think we saw that in the recent financial figures that came out a couple of weeks ago. They've made some changes, obviously behind the scenes. They've added to the backroom staff. There's going to be some upgrades to the training ground. So they're doing the things I think that fans wanted them to do. Little things that might seem insignificant to people who don't understand Newcastle, but they're not insignificant things. Just the optics of seeing the windows being cleaned in October, I think it was. That's massive when you've got fans and Twitter accounts about the state of St James's Park. So they've made a lot of decisions that are really good. They'll undoubtedly have done things that they probably think they could have done better or differently. And on the football, they got the Eddie Howe appointment spot on, didn't they? And the signings in the January transfer window, well, have they ever had a better January transfer window in Newcastle? And for all the criticism for spending the money, I think the 90-ish, whatever it was, you never quite know the exact figures, the million that they spent, is about the same as they spent in all the windows in January under Mike Ashley combined. So they had to spend big because of the lack of investment over the years that led them to be in the position they were in, and they did it. They delivered, and people are generally pretty happy with them, aren't they? So you can totally understand why, in terms of the work that they've done at the club.
We haven't got time to talk about the transfer window, the January transfer window at the moment, but everybody at the Tune Under podcast, oh my God, we love Bruno. What a player he is. He is going to be some player for us going forward. So I think even if we can get maybe a couple more Brunos in this upcoming transfer window, that kind of standard, and then supplement that with other, solid squad players, that might be a good thing for us to do, and we might be able to afford that. What's your take on how the summer transfer window is going to go? Do you think it's going to be crazy, or do you think things, because Eddie Howe is very keen on making sure things stay calm as possible? How do you think it might go?
I think Eddie Howe's a brilliant manager for Newcastle because of how he can play things down and keep a lid on things, because of how things can often spiral out of control here. His approach and his mindset and the sort of control that he has over the messaging is probably very good. Bruno's a superstar, and it's fantastic to see him in a black and white shirt. I think what you need is for Bruno not to be your best player. If Bruno isn't your best player, then you know that the team is really improving. Yeah. So if you can get another couple like him at that level, fantastic. There's obviously areas of the squad they need to strengthen. You might look, and I remember talking to Steve Bruce last summer about it, and he said, you need to improve the spine of the team. I think they probably still need to improve the spine of the team because they need another centre forward, at least one. Cam Wilson is first class, but it's fitness with him always, sadly. But love watching him play, as we all do. It's just such a shame he's had so many injuries. Sean Longstaff signed a new contract, which I'm pleased about, because he's someone that Eddie Howe has worked with and the staff have worked with to try and improve. He has improved, and as Longstaff himself has alluded to, he probably suffered for a couple of years without having that level of coaching that he wanted and needed. But they might need another midfielder as well, which would give them 6 central midfielders. I think we probably would all say that another central defender with the likes of Clark and Fernandez probably not going to be around because they're not first choice anymore. And they're clearly looking at the goalkeeping situation. So there's that, but also a left back, whether it's Target or someone else, and that needs to be resolved, and possibly another wide player. So there's 6 there, which is similar to January, isn't it? They brought in 5, and Eddie Howe said that he thought 5 was a good number for January, and he probably liked that number of signings again, because too many can disrupt the mood and the feel in the squad. And it's a good group of players that have been together largely for 5 or 6 years now, and have done a fantastic job in lifting the club back up, keeping the club up, with not a lot of investment around it. But that core, Lascelles, Clark, Dummett, who's signed and is staying, Darlow, Richie
Hayden.
Dalby. I hope I haven't forgotten anybody. I mean, there's others that have moved on as well. I'm sure their contribution won't be forgotten, because what they've done is significant, and they're here when the takeover happens, and obviously change is coming. But what those lads have done for Newcastle over the years, in difficult times, is really meaningful. So it could be an exciting summer. There'll be lots of links, there'll be lots of rumours, but we're used to that now after January, which was chaotic and awful, and I don't really enjoy the transfer window. I just look forward to the football starting, and when it does, hopefully they'll have an even stronger team.
We spoke to pro Chris Waff, just as January transfer window is kicking off, and I felt sorry for him. He was like, he clearly hadn't slept for about 3 days, and he was like, this is what it's going to be like.
Yeah, well, it's probably worse for the people at the club as well, with all the negotiating and trading that they're trying to do. January was full on. You've got more time in the summer, haven't you?
Yeah.
And there's no World Cup this summer either, so that could make things easier in terms of movement, just logistically. But yeah, it's Newcastle are now just in a they go into the transfer window with more money to spend and with more ambition. Yeah.
The last question what we want to ask really is about, because Newcastle, the sleeping giant has awoken. You know, Newcastle are on the move, and that's exciting for all of the fans and exciting for the region and everybody connected with the club. But for you professionally, I'm really interested in this. You're going to probably get the chance to commentate maybe on cup semi-finals, maybe on cup finals, European nights. Have you thought about that much, and how does that feel to think that you might be the voice of some of these really famous moments, or do you try not to think too far ahead?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's any Newcastle fan that hasn't dreamt of a brighter future for the club, and it's probably the same for us, because all of the media want Newcastle to be successful and to do well. I mean, it's not necessarily cheerleading for the club, but it's just it's better for us if the team does better. So yeah, I have thought about it, and I would love to follow Newcastle around Europe personally. I think that would be amazing if the team could get back there. I was lucky enough to do one of the Europa League games in 2013 in Moscow, which was a great experience. Dreadful match, but just to be away and see the fans back in Europe, because the club had shown, while we were growing up, that it could sit quite nicely in amongst those clubs that compete in Europe. So it would be great to get back there, and there'll be generations of fans that haven't experienced that before. I mean, most of us haven't experienced cups, have we? Most of us haven't experienced cup runs and Wembley, apart from a couple of occasions. So it would be great to think that they could go there. And when you look at some of the clubs like Liverpool and Chelsea, and they just do that with such regularity, I think once or twice to begin with would be nice for Newcastle. What we do is we provide words and broadcast moments, but the words accompany the moments, and the goals that we commentate on, they're not our goals. They are goals that belong to the players, the team, the club, and I guess the fans as well. So we just have to do justice to the big moments, or even the smaller ones, whether it's a consolation goal, whether it's like the Everton comeback that we mentioned, whether it's the Arsenal game, Bruno against Leicester, and many, many others. So that's what we have to do. So it's never about us, and it's never about me. I'm just a voice, and there are plenty of other voices out there commentating up and down the country. But it is a privilege to be there, to be calling these moments, and to be in the ground. And I think, if we can see Newcastle have some big occasions and get to Wembley, get back into Europe, then that would be really, really exciting. It'd be great for the profile and the status of the club and everything that it brings. But it's about the football, isn't it? And it's about sporting success. And as fans, that's what people want to see. And I just reiterate that I think that's what the North East media want to see, because when the clubs do better, it's better for us in the media. So that would be nice in the years to come. Yeah, if we are following a team that's not in the bottom third of the Premier League.
I think that's probably a pretty perfect place to end it. We've taken up enough of your time on this Thursday afternoon. It's bedtime in Australia. Thanks very much, Matthew, for coming on. That's been absolutely fantastic. When Newcastle come down under for a tour, give us a shout. We'll meet up with you. We'll take you for a schooner somewhere.
That'll be my pleasure, and thanks for having me on. I know you've done a lot of listening for a long time.
That's brilliant.
It's been something night with you, but it's been a pleasure to meet you and join you on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
We'll still be here through the summer. We're going to be doing a squad analysis and look at the transfer window. We've also got Kieran Maguire from Price of Football coming on, so that'll be fantastic for us. So stay tuned for that. Please subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at TuneUnderPod. We're on Facebook, and the website's tuneunder.com. We will see you soon. Thanks very much, guys.
See you later. Thank you.
Thanks, lads. Bye.